How's it going? This video is going to be part of the psychoanalytic diagnosis series, and this is going to be the first video on narcissism. And in this video, I'll be using audio from an interview with Nancy McWilliams. If you find this video, or really any of the psychoanalytic diagnosis series videos, useful, I highly recommend her book, Psychoanalytic Diagnosis. It's really one of those special books that can be understood by complete beginners, but also would be valuable for people experienced in the field. But let's get to it.
In the clinical literature on narcissism, you see a lot of commentary about how there are really two versions of it, the arrogant version and the kind of depressed, depleted version. And we've called them different things. I think Gabbard calls it the oblivious narcissist, who's the one who's, I'm wonderful and everybody should worship me, and the hyper-vigilant narcissist, who's the one who's, where are my next self-esteem supplies coming from? I need affirmation that I'm okay. I really don't like the DSM descriptions of personality disorders. Starting in 1980, they tried to shift the DSM to having criteria that were able to look at external behaviors. So you can get more agreement among experts that way than if you're trying to infer what's going on inside. But for a therapist, it's more important to know what's going on inside. The DSM pretty much describes the more arrogant version, but that arrogant version is a defense against another self-state in which the person feels terrible about themselves. And so their issue is all about self-esteem maintenance, and they use inflated self-esteem to defend against insufficient self-esteem. So they're easier to understand if you think of them as a person who came of age in such a way that they were always having to get narcissistic supplies, as we say in the trade. They need evidence of their being important and powerful and beautiful and well-known. Not all depressions are alike, but the narcissistic version of depression is, I'm empty, I don't know who I am, help, I need somebody to make me popular and famous and powerful, and where am I going to get that? And I don't see where, so I'm depressed. That's very different from other kinds of depression, which, for example, involve the fear that I'm bad. It's more of a guilty depression. The narcissistic version of a depression is a shamed depression. If you've got certain capacities and you have narcissistic psychological tendencies, then if you're successful, you tend to look very grandiose. But therapists see a lot of people who either were successful and lost it, and then they don't know who they are and they don't know what life is about, or who wish they had it and are very empty and come to us saying things like, you got to make me popular, you got to make me, if I were beautiful and rich and connected, then I'd be fine. And they don't have a concept of anything else that would make them okay. About how you get this way is that somehow your truer qualities, your more authentic qualities, especially your feelings, were not fully accepted and recognized by your family of origin. And for whatever reason, that created in you the sense that you had to be false in some ways or you had no value. Now, one version of how to create a person with difficult narcissistic problems is to be super critical all the time. Why an A? Why not an A plus? And the child will always feel I'm not good enough and get desperate to be good enough because that's the only way that the kid feels valuable. But another way to do it is to say, you're wonderful, you're terrific. If your teacher criticizes you, I'm going to go and tell her a thing or two. We're seeing a lot of that in Western cultures these days because we've tried to overcorrect for the previous version. But the kid can get the same message there, because if a kid feels that the parent needs them to be perfect and is distorting them into a perfect being, they're not getting any message that their ordinary, flawed, naughty, problematic qualities are part of them and acceptable because they're a human being. So you can create somebody with a big problem in their core sense of who they are by any kind of distortion to try to make them into the child that a parent needs to reflect well on the parent. In the literature, again and again, we find that people tell us histories that make it sound to us like they were treated as, the jargon is narcissistic extensions. The parent needs them to be an extension of the parent that sheds a great light on the parent. Now, we all do this to some extent with our kids. We want our kids to make us look good as parents. But if that's the chronic, constant message, you have to be perfect so that I, your parent, will look perfect. The kid gets to learn that you're fulfilling a function for your parent's self-esteem, but who are you? So there's an emptiness about it. And the most painful thing about the emptiness is the inability to really love other people as they are. People with narcissistic issues in relationships tend to be chronically critical and trying to improve their partner rather than deeply loving a person as he or she is. Very often, people with a lot of narcissistic problems can idealize other people, and that's the closest they get to real love. And in relationships, they fall in love, meaning that they go through that early phase of idealizing the other person that we all do when we fall in love. And then, when they realize that the person they are in love with is a human being, they start getting critical. And it's because they really don't have the concept of having been loved for who they are, so they can't love others for who they are. But they use the term love, and they'll talk about somebody being the most wonderful this or the best that. And so idealization is sort of the closest that they can get. They criticize other people for not taking care of them. In fact, a real problem in relationships with a narcissistic person is that people who are very narcissistic in their personalities tend to have this idea that if I'm in relationship with you, you should simply divine my needs and meet them. I shouldn't have to ask because I feel shame about asking. Shame is really at the root of narcissistic problems. If I say to them, when they complain about somebody, well, did you make your needs explicit? What I get back is, what do you mean needs? You see the shame and the contempt for their being a person with needs. And in couple therapy, I'll try to get them to actually say, here's what I would need from you. But it's really, really hard for them. They would prefer to stay in the position of, you did that wrong, you're just a loser.